April 30th, 1803. On this single day, the United States doubled in size with the stroke of a pen. Or did it? Imagine waking up in an America that ends at the Mississippi River. An America trapped between the Atlantic Ocean and a French empire that controls the entire heartland of the continent. This isn't fantasy. This was nearly our reality. For just $15 million, roughly $18 per square mile, Napoleon Bonaparte sold 828,000 square miles of North American territory to the young United States. But what if his brother Lucian had convinced him otherwise? What if Napoleon's imperial ambitions in the New World had survived? The Louisiana Purchase was never guaranteed. It hung by a thread of circumstance, driven by Napoleon's desperate need for cash to fight Britain. Remove that desperation, and everything changes. The America you know, from sea to shining sea, never exists. Instead, three great powers collide across the North American continent in a struggle that reshapes the entire world. This is that story. To understand what never happened, you must first grasp Napoleon's vision. The Louisiana Territory wasn't just land, it was the key to a French empire stretching from the Caribbean to Canada. In our timeline, Napoleon abandoned this dream when Saint-Domingue, modern Haiti, erupted in revolution. His armies died by the thousands from yellow fever and guerrilla warfare. He needed money desperately to rebuild his forces for European conquest. But imagine a different outcome. Imagine French forces crushing the Haitian Revolution in 1802. With the Caribbean secured and producing wealth, Napoleon no longer faces bankruptcy. He doesn't need American gold. Instead, he pours resources into Louisiana, fortifying New Orleans, establishing military outposts along the Mississippi, and inviting thousands of French settlers to populate the territory. By 1810, New Orleans becomes the Paris of the New World, a gleaming jewel of French culture with 100,000 inhabitants. The Mississippi River, America's natural highway to expansion, becomes a border and a battleground. President Thomas Jefferson's worst nightmare materializes. The United States, barely 20 years old, finds itself caged. To the west, French Louisiana blocks expansion. To the north, British Canada looms. To the south, Spanish Florida remains hostile. The young republic's manifest destiny dies before it's even conceived. American settlers still pour westward. Human ambition doesn't simply stop at borders drawn on maps, but now they enter French territory illegally. Conflicts erupt constantly. French colonial authorities arrest American homesteaders. Border skirmishes escalate into massacres. By 1812, when war with Britain erupts in our timeline, this alternate America faces a two-front nightmare. Britain attacks from Canada, while France closes the Mississippi to American commerce, strangling the economy of Western territories like Kentucky and Tennessee. The population pressure becomes unbearable. Cities along the eastern seaboard swell with people who have nowhere else to go. Instead of spreading across a continent, America becomes increasingly urban, crowded, and politically unstable. The democratic experiment teeters on the edge of failure as different regions develop incompatible interests, and the lack of new land eliminates the safety valve that prevented class warfare in our timeline. By 1820, North America becomes a powder keg divided among three empires. British Canada expands westward aggressively, claiming Oregon country and establishing the Red River Colony in modern Manitoba. French Louisiana pushes north and west, establishing Fort Napoleon in modern Kansas City and claiming all territory drained by the Missouri River. The United States, meanwhile, turns its frustrated expansion southward. In this timeline, the acquisition of Spanish Florida happens earlier and more violently. American forces invade Cuba in 1821, turning it into a state rather than a Spanish colony. The Caribbean becomes America's outlet for expansion, not the Great Plains. This creates a fundamentally different national character. Instead of farmers and cowboys, American identity centers on naval power and Caribbean trade. The economy becomes more plantation-based, strengthening slavery, rather than diluting it across new Western states. The political balance shifts dramatically. Without free soil Western territories to counter slave states, the South gains permanent political dominance. The Missouri Compromise never happens because Missouri remains French territory, delaying the national reckoning over slavery by decades, but making it far bloodier when it finally arrives. The Continental War of 1835–1842 makes our Civil War look like a border skirmish. It begins, as these things do, with an incident. A French merchant vessel is seized by American forces in the disputed waters where the Red River meets the Mississippi. France demands its return. America refuses. Within weeks, 3 empires mobilize for total war. The United States attacks French positions along the Mississippi, hoping to seize New Orleans and break French power in one decisive campaign. But Napoleon III, ruling France in this timeline after his uncle's designated heir takes the throne, proves as capable as his famous uncle. French forces don't just defend. They counterattack, pushing American armies back to the Appalachian Mountains. Meanwhile, Britain sees opportunity. Canadian forces sweep south, capturing Detroit, Cleveland, and nearly reaching Pittsburgh before American militias halt them. The war becomes a grinding stalemate. Trenches stretch from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. Hundreds of thousands die in battles with names lost to our history, but seared into this alternate world's memory. The Siege of Cincinnati, the massacre at St. Louis, the Blood Winter of 1839, when all 3 armies nearly froze to death in Illinois. In 1842, exhausted and bankrupt, the 3 empires signed the Treaty of Three Capitals, negotiated simultaneously in Washington, Paris, and London via newly invented telegraph. The borders freeze roughly where armies stopped fighting. France retains Louisiana, but grants American commercial access to the Mississippi. Britain keeps Canada and its western territories. America keeps its eastern states and Caribbean possessions, but the real outcome isn't written in the treaty. It's written in blood and economics. The United States, having spent 7 years in devastating war, emerges with its economy shattered and its political system in crisis. The cost of the Continental War exceeds the price of the Louisiana Purchase 100 times over. Slavery, strengthened by the Caribbean expansion and Southern political dominance, becomes more entrenched rather than less. The Industrial Revolution, which propelled America to superpower status in our timeline, happens primarily in British Canada and French Louisiana, where vast resources and territory allow rapid development. By 1850, the United States isn't the rising giant of our history. It's a middle-tier power, roughly equivalent to Spain or the Netherlands, important regionally but not globally. Let's jump forward and examine the cascading consequences. Without American westward expansion, the California Gold Rush of 1849 happens under French colonial rule. French Louisiana becomes fabulously wealthy. Paris, not Washington or New York, becomes the primary destination for European immigrants seeking opportunity in the New World. French culture dominates the continent's interior. By 1900, cities like St. Louis, Kansas City, and Sacramento are French-speaking metropolises. Without the vast American market spanning a continent, the scale of industrialization changes dramatically. There's no transcontinental railroad uniting Pacific to Atlantic under one flag. No unified market allowing companies like Standard Oil or Carnegie Steel to reach unprecedented size. In this timeline, North America develops more like Europe, multiple mid-sized nations with complex trade relationships and periodic wars. The native populations face a different fate. Instead of one massive American expansion destroying indigenous nations in a single overwhelming wave, they navigate between competing empires. Some tribes ally with France against America. Others play powers against each other. The Sioux Nation, in this timeline, survives as a semi-autonomous French protectorate, controlling territory in the modern Dakotas well into the 20th century. History doesn't repeat, it rhymes in different keys. When World War I erupts in 1914, North America's division reshapes global conflict. In our timeline, American intervention in 1917 tipped the balance, making Allied victory possible. But this America, smaller, weaker, exhausted by its own internal tensions, remains neutral throughout. British Canada joins the British Empire's war effort, sending troops to Europe. French Louisiana, despite tensions with metropolitan France, ultimately supports the mother country with resources and volunteers. But the United States, it sits out the conflict, profiting from selling supplies to all sides. Without American intervention, the Great War grinds to an exhausted stalemate in 1919. No clear victor emerges. The punishing Treaty of Versailles that created conditions for Hitler's rise never happens. The Russian Revolution succeeds, but faces a different European landscape. Most significantly, the 20th century doesn't become the American century. There's no jazz spreading from New Orleans, which in this timeline remains a French city. No Hollywood, California develops under French cultural influence. The global lingua franca isn't English. The economic models that dominated our world, American capitalism, American consumer culture, American technological innovation, never achieve global hegemony. Instead, you get a multipolar world where French, British, and American spheres of influence remain roughly balanced, until the atomic age begins. Here's where it gets truly terrifying. In our timeline, the Manhattan Project succeeded because America's vast territory, resources, and immigrant scientific talent converged in one nation. But in this divided continent, the atomic bomb isn't born in Los Alamos, New Mexico. Instead, 3 separate crash programs race toward nuclear weapons in the 1940s. British Canada, French Louisiana, and the United States each pursue independent research, sharing nothing, trusting no one. The Soviet Union, as in our timeline, joins this race. But now it's not a two-power Cold War, it's a multipolar nuclear standoff, with at least 4 fingers on 4 different triggers. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction becomes exponentially more complex and unstable when calculated between multiple historic rivals separated by mere rivers and imaginary lines. Close your eyes and imagine the Cuban Missile Crisis. But with French nuclear missiles already positioned in New Orleans, British nukes in Toronto, and American weapons aimed at both. The probability of miscalculation, of accidental launch, of regional conflict escalating to atomic holocaust, it multiplies with each additional nuclear power. Many historians in this timeline believe global civilization simply got lucky to survive the 1960s. Some say we're still living on borrowed time. So we return to that moment in 1803, a desperate emperor, an ambitious president, $15 million, 3 men in a room in Paris negotiating the fate of a continent. In our timeline, the deal went through. America became a continental power, then a superpower, then the hyperpower that shaped the modern world for better and worse. But it was never inevitable. Remove Napoleon's Caribbean disaster, give him slightly different advisors. Let the negotiations drag on 3 months longer until circumstances changed, and everything unravels. The United States, you know, from Maine to California, from the Great Lakes to the Rio Grande, exists because of a contingency, a moment of chance that could have broken differently. This alternate history isn't just a thought experiment. It's a mirror that shows us how fragile our present reality truly is. How much of what we consider inevitable was actually a coin flip that happened to land the way it did. The next time you look at a map of the United States, remember, this continental nation, this empire of liberty, this global superpower, it all balanced on a single deal that almost didn't happen. Every border is a choice. Every nation is a possibility that became real, and 1,000 others that didn't. And somewhere, in the infinite branching of parallel worlds, an America that stops at the Mississippi still struggles to become what it might have been. Sweet dreams.